What do you think that is on the screen? T-Rex, dinosaur. But the reason why that picture is up on the screen is because that's what my daughter thinks I am. Now, that video tells me you guys have been having a lot of fun. And Aditya tells me that you had a great conversation on sustainability yesterday. So I'm wondering, what kind of a conversation are we going to have today which will build on what you've already had so far in this field? So to trigger that conversation, let's start from here. Who loves Greta Thunberg? I see a few hands and I hear a few no ones. And I'm tempted to ask you the question, okay, so why don't you like Greta Thunberg? Go ahead.
She continues to complain about climate change, but she offers no real solutions. There are other people with the same age as her.
Did you hear what he said? All right, lovely.
There are other people the same age who are coming up with real solutions, but aren't backed by billionaires like George Soros, so they're not getting as much money.
Brilliant. Okay. So who loves Greta Thunberg? Some of you guys did. Let's go here. Why do you like Greta Thunberg?
Because at a very small age, she has decided to bring a change.
Okay, so she's trying to bring a change. Another one?
These things are very nice. I want to become a good leader in the future, so she is my inspiration for the leadership.
All right. Both valid points of view. That she is trying to bring about change, but she is indeed saying that there are lots of things that are wrong, but not really offering a solution at this point in time. Okay, so if this is the story of Greta Thunberg, the next question is, who or what are we really trying to save, or rather Greta Thunberg trying to save, or the people who are taking action, who or what are they really trying to save through all this climate action? Ourselves, our mindset, future generations, yes, Earth, thoughts. That's interesting. Okay, so I've got Earth and I've got ourselves. Yeah? Are these the same or are these different? So if we rephrase the question, are we saving the planet or are we saving people on the planet? Shall we do a vote? You guys have been doing lots of votes, right? So who thinks... We'll do a third one on that one. So who thinks that by taking or by living sustainably, by taking climate action, we are saving ourselves? Okay, very good. That's a lot of you. Wonderful. And so who thinks we are saving Earth? Almost as many. Perhaps a little bit more, actually. Wonderful topic for a debate. I don't know if you're having a debate on that in your committees already. I know one of your committees has conservation listed on it. One has SDG 4, so maybe you'll get there. Okay, so during the course of this conversation, let's see if we can find answers to this question. All right? So what is the big problem? Why are we having all these conversations on sustainability? Yes?
Climate change caused by the increasingly growing population.
Climate, so the problem is population, which leads to climate change. Is that right? Okay. Any other answers? Human greed, okay. Is that a problem?
Yeah, because of more productivity, we are using more elements, so it can
Too much use of natural resources is the problem. Okay? What's the problem? Is human needs a problem? Okay? So cutting down of the trees is the problem. All right?
People often argue that increase in temperature is cyclical. However, the human use of fossil fuels and or whatever has just catalyzed that cycle. So it's a possibility that climate change is, although catalyzed by humans, it's not exactly created by humans.
Ah. I don't think 45 minutes is enough for this conversation. Very good point. See whether we find some more answers to this. That is it anthropogenic? Or is it something that's more natural? Or is it both? Which one should we worry about? We'll deal with that. Yes. What do you think is the big problem? To list out all the problems. Good God. Okay. Let's move on then. So you've mentioned a bunch of things which could be a problem. Cutting down of trees, the way we live, greed, etc., etc. What does all of this lead to? Suppose we had all of this and still had a great world. Why does having all of this prevent us from having a great world? So the thing is, while the earth has been warming for a long time, the problem is it's warming much faster now. That's the real problem, or that's the manifestation of the real problem. And why is that happening? It's happening because it's really heating up. So you were right when you said that there are many reasons why the earth heats up, but because of the way we live, because of the things we are doing, see the way the curve has turned and how sharply it is going up. That's why we're having the conversation today, and we were not having this conversation 50 years, 60 years, 70 years ago. Because at that time, the pace of increase was not so high. Right? So this is the problem we have to solve. How do we keep this to manageable levels? How do we bring it down? And so on. So all the reasons you mentioned actually cause this. Okay? So, why is this a problem? Now you know already. Why is the increase of temperature a problem? Yes? Why is it a problem? One second. It is irreversible. Rise in sea level. Yes? Flooding. Droughts. Ice melts. Melting of glaciers. You know them all. We are going to breeze through the next few slides. Did you have one? Okay, so sea level rise, you talked about that. Disappearing glaciers, and the same place in 2006, the same place in 2018. Disappearing ice caps, so ice melt. Uncertainty of precipitation. Sometimes you get too much, sometimes you get too little. So this sudden rising of temperature makes all of this happen. So why does temperature rise all of a sudden? What's making all of that happen? Emission of carbon. Why is emission of carbon happening? Because of human beings. Okay, what are human beings doing? Because of vehicles? So what are vehicles doing? They emit.
Because of the revolution of 21st century, we are creating new inventions which create carbon dioxide.
Inventions are creating carbon or emitting carbon dioxide. Okay? Greenhouse gases. So right now we've got transportation as the reason. Any others? Energy. What about that?
I mean, any activity requires energy, and we use mainly
Fossil fuel based energy. And burning of that causes emissions. Actually, anything we do, almost anything we do, leads to the emission of carbon dioxide. That's a scary thought, right? And how on earth do we go on living life if there is no way to lead a low carbon way of life, let alone a no or a zero carbon way of life? That's the challenge. Someone had mentioned earlier that population was a problem. It's a problem because if there are too many people on earth, then the rate at which emissions happen automatically increase. Because everyone will travel, everyone will live in a house, everyone will wear clothes. Clothes have to be made for everyone, right? So we've sort of ended up creating a problem which we didn't know we were creating. Right? When we discovered an automobile, when we discovered fossil fuels, coal, let's say, or diesel or anything, we didn't know we were going to create this problem. The chaps who discovered it didn't know they were creating this problem. But now we do. So now we've got to figure out what do we do to build a way of life which doesn't add to this problem. Right? You want to say something?
So if population is the real problem, then and supposedly emissions will cause the world to end in the next 60 years, then isn't the only feasible solution to the population problem causing of population?
Radical thought. We don't like Hitler, do we? So it is not fair to say that population is the only problem. Population exacerbates the problem, or rapid increase of population exacerbates the problem. It's a combination of population and per capita emission which leads to the problem. So you can tackle it from both sides. You can see that population doesn't rise rapidly as Thailand did, or you can see whether there is a way of life which is not as carbon intensive as it is now. Right? The good news about population is that there are many parts of the world where population is plateauing out. Most developed nations, populations are plateauing out, and in many places native population is actually going down. And if their overall statistics are not showing a decrease, it's only because of migration. That's a small aside from what I've wanted to speak to you about, but I'm glad you brought up the point on population so that we get a perspective on it.
Mindset is a problem because if we don't change mindset, so they have water and they can water can also lead to global warming. So mindset is the main problem.
Good. So mindset is an issue and we will talk about it. So what are the biggest sources of population? I've put 3 up there. Energy, transport, agriculture, right? There may be more, but this is just to get a sense. And earlier in the conversation, sir, you mentioned energy. Here it is. And we, as of now, our dominant sources of energy are all fossil fuel based. And whenever we use this energy, there's emissions. Our ways of mobility are such that we burn fossil fuels and therefore there are emissions. Agriculture is the funny thing in the mix, where there are emissions because of the way we cultivate our crops and because of natural emissions from cattle. All right. You mentioned this earlier. We are causing deforestation. Why is this a problem? What if we didn't cause deforestation? What would happen? Soil would be fertile. Anything else? Carbon dioxide would be absorbed by the trees. Yes, sir. Same point. Carbon dioxide would be absorbed by the trees. So, we would get more fresh oxygen, right? Yeah. So the thing is, on one side, we are emitting carbon. On the other side, we are taking away trees, which takes carbon out of the air. So the disbalance is becoming more. So why were we not having this conversation 70 years ago? Probably because most of the carbon we were emitting was being absorbed by the available trees. There is one other natural body that absorbs carbon dioxide. Do you know what that is? The ocean. See, I began by saying you guys know all the answers. But we are working very hard to destroy the oceans, aren't we? Why do you say yes? Decrease in coral reefs is a result, yes. Yes. The ability of the ocean to absorb carbon dioxide. Yes?
Corporations have begun dumping large amounts of trash because
The Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Okay, I'm going to go to that corner. You know, nobody's putting their hand up there. They must be doing something. Anybody there? How are we killing the oceans? I'm sorry I woke you up. Plastic. What's plastic doing? It's going into turtles. Did you see that video that came around on WhatsApp? Yeah. So it's going into fishes. In fact, I don't know, you must have seen that picture on WhatsApp too, where a lady buys a fish and says, "May I have a plastic packet?" And the fishmonger says, "Oh, it's already inside it." Yeah? So yes, I mean, this is causing havoc. But the essence of the story is that because of the way we are living our lives, we are reducing the ability of oceans to be able to capture carbon dioxide. So can you see the disbalancing forces now? On one side, we, through our lifestyles, are increasing the emission of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide being one of them. On the other side, because of our lifestyle, we are reducing the ability of the earth to capture carbon dioxide from the earth. It's no surprise that the rate at which warming is happening has increased so sharply in the last few decades. Right? So who should do something about it? We should do something about it. Who?
So technically the people who create the problem,
Should solve the problem.
so I think
Boomers should solve the problem. That's me. Yeah, good answer. There's only one problem. The boomers aren't going to last very long. Yeah? The early boomers have already started going away. So if you're waiting for the boomers to solve the problem, boy, you've got a problem. Right? So who should solve the problem? Okay, so I've got us. Do we have something else? Ecologists, he says. We, that's us. Okay. Our parents should solve, that's the boomers. Your parents are all boomers. Anybody else? Nobody else. Our grandparents should solve the problem. You're very lucky, young man, if your grandparents are still there. Say I love you to them every day. Okay. So this is actually a very interesting situation. This is the first time when I've asked this question and nobody has said the government. Okay, so do you think the government should do something about it? Carbon tax, you want the government to do carbon tax? Okay. Do you guys have a rule of going one at a time? Or does the United Nations not follow that rule? It's okay, you can tell me. I haven't been in a model UN before. Right. So who goes?
It is said that human is the largest and biggest resource in the world. So if humans will not change, nobody can change the world.
Done. So that's us. Yes, sir. Sure. Okay.
So doesn't the government consist of the people?
Doesn't the government consist of the people? That's a question I've been asking every day of my life. And, once they become government, it's strange how they don't become people. I don't know. Maybe check it out, see how it goes for you. Yeah.
The government, taking into consideration like the United States,
Huh.
their government is ruling the world most,
Right.
and they totally ignore the fact that Donald Trump is.
True. But I don't want to get hung up on United States. It's one country out of 195. I know. But if you notice, that's the only example we're talking about. So there are more governments in the world. There are 195 countries that signed the treaty. Yes.
We should do something ourselves because if we leave everything to the government, nothing will
No, I agree. So the question is not us or the government. The question is, who are the people who should take action? Yeah. The UNEP, okay? Yes, ma'am. There you go. 100 companies. Go on. Finish it.
You have one university contributing to majority of the world today, and you place that expectation on people who do not have the kind of power to be for the university to be something that's not viable. If I expect a straw is not going to do anything in the long term, if, for example, to put a piece of insurance.
Good. So we've got us, we've got companies, we've got UNEP. I've heard you, ecologists. But ecologists is us, right? Young minds. Wonderful. Yes?
I think everyone should contribute in their own way because I'm saying that different people have different ways to contribute. Like even entrepreneurs, many feel that capitalism is the one, that is creating this thing. But if you see many inventions, such as, for example, a 16 gigabyte pen drive, if those did not exist, the number of pages we can fit into that pen drive, imagine how many trees we would have cut.
Very true.
Billions and billions of trees.
Very true.
So what I believe the government, the people, and all of us, right? All our differences should work on this together. I don't think we should politicize such things such as human rights and taking care of our own home. And I think we all should work together because at the end it will benefit us.
Spoken like a true member of the United Nations. Wonderful. I have lots of people wanting to answer this question. Let me go with you first. I'll come back to you next, ma'am. Then we'll do a couple of you, and then we'll move on if you don't mind. Yes.
Sir, I do not believe that. What I'd like to say is we should not first even put a false hope into the people. The president of Canada, Mr. Justin Trudeau, has said that Canada is working towards the climate change, but then he has also said that they are building another pipeline to get all of the oil out of Canada.
True.
So I believe we must not put false hope.
Right. So we can't depend on a chap simply because he's saying the right thing but may not be doing the right thing.
Yes.
Okay. We had a lady there who had a hand up. Yes, ma'am.
I think when it comes to definitely talking about in product packaging, when you say that it's not fair for us to expect humans to be in the they don't have time there, I feel like it wasn't fair for humans to expect us to become their best in the first place.
True. There is something I'm hearing in this room which I hear when I go for the annual United Nations Conference on Climate. where one group of people say, I didn't create this problem. Why are you asking me to solve it? Typically countries like India. And then there's another group that says, I may have created the problem. Of course, they don't say that it doesn't matter who created the problem. You're the guy who's growing. So you grow properly and don't tell me what to do. So this is the general conversation. And as long as this goes on, we never get to solutions. And in Paris, when the governments met and were trying to sign the climate accord, for the first 13 days, this is all that happened. One group would ask the other group to do the work and say, I don't have much to do. I'm not growing. You're going to consume 300% more coal in the next 5 years. Why aren't you doing something? Then that group would turn around and say, if I consume 300% more coal in the next 5 years, I will still be consuming only 20% of the coal that you will consume. So why aren't you doing something? And this is how it went on. Which is why that conference in Paris in 2015 did not finish when it was supposed to finish. And it took a lot of leadership from the President of France, from the then President of the US, from the Prime Minister of India, and a few others, to call each other up and say, hey, let's put an end to this, or we'll never get anywhere. And that's when they finally managed to do this, to sign the Paris Accord. Right? Now we all know what Donald Trump did after that. Yeah? But do we know what the other 194 fellows did or are doing? Okay, so you know about Donald Trump of the United States. Do you know about Governor Brown? Or Governor Inslee? Or 27 out of the 50 states, which by themselves are contributing more than what United States has committed to the world. So if the other 23 just don't make things worse and remain where they are, US as a nation, despite Donald Trump, can deliver on the Paris Accord even if they pull out of it. That is what gives us hope. It's very easy for us to say that the governments are doing nothing. It's very easy. After all, who are they? Dinosaurs? Most of them. But you guys all live in India, right? If you go to a conference in agriculture, you'll hear the same thing. The government is doing nothing. But you know how many of us there are in India? 1.2 billion, 1.4 billion. We don't have a problem with food. The same country, about 20 years ago, was growing about 190 million tons of food. Today, it is growing 270 million tons of food on the same amount of land because the government and the farmers have worked together to increase productivity. So when we know the numbers, we get a sense of what the government is doing. The problem, I won't call it a problem, the expectation is that the government will need to do more. And there's nothing wrong with the expectation, as long as we acknowledge what the government is already doing. It gives us the power then to work with the government and help them do more. Because if we go and tell them that you guys are doing nothing, they're not going to listen to us. If your dad came and told you you're doing nothing, what do you think you're going to do to him? So this is one thing the governments did. Created a framework. Every government made a promise. Some governments are achieving the promise in time, some are not, but there is progress. When we went to Paris, the world was heading for a situation where average temperature rise would be around 4 degrees centigrade. when we left Paris, if every government kept its commitment, we are supposed to hit a place of 2.7 degrees temperature rise. The last emissions gap report says that because everybody is not yet keeping their promise, we have come down from a trajectory of 3.7 to 3.2, but haven't reached 2.7 and are far away from 2 degrees centigrade. So that's the job that one has to do. And that's the conversation that's going to continue from this Monday in Madrid amongst the countries of the world on how do we go from the projected 3.2 towards closer to well below 2 and perhaps 1.5. You're familiar with this. The UN came together, created the Sustainable Development Goals, you had lots of discussions on this, and this has also created a framework for action. So what is the Indian government doing? I can't talk to you about every government, but I can talk to you about the Indian government. Do any of you have a sense of what the Indian government's promises to the world were in Paris in 2015? So you can take a guess. What did we promise? What did we say we will do? So these are our three big promises. We've said that we will reduce emissions intensity, which means what? I'll come back. Which means what? Which means we will do things, but everything we do, we will try to do with lesser emissions. And we will cut it by 33 to 35%. Among the more ambitious commitments in the world, especially because it's a growing country. Yeah, population is growing, economy is growing, people are becoming better off. That increases the challenge of reducing emissions intensity. The second promise was 40% of our electricity will come from non-fossil fuel sources. Right? Today, about 59% of our electricity comes from fossil fuel sources. The promise is that by 2030, we will aim for 40% of electricity from non-fossil fuel sources. Again, a very ambitious commitment from a country our size, with increasing demand for energy and electricity. By 2030, the amount of electricity we will use is likely to be double or maybe more than double of what it was in 2015. So 40% of 2030 is actually almost 60% of what it was in 2015. That's why it is such a massive, ambitious target. And then the government also promised to create additional cumulative carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons. Carbon sink essentially means more trees, cleaner water bodies, so that carbon can be sucked in. So these are the three big promises. Now you would possibly think, yes ma'am, you would possibly think that, hey, I don't think the Indian government's done too much. They're too busy fighting amongst themselves. Yeah? So let's take a look at what they've actually done. We had 10 megawatts of renewable energy in 2010. We have 80,000 megawatts of renewable energy now, 9 years down the line. You can see for yourselves how many times the increase has happened. We have the world's largest LED program. Yeah, and you can see the numbers there. There were 30 lakh bulbs in 2015. There are some 700 lakh LED bulbs out there today. And this program has actually gone to London, where the public buildings in London are now being made into LED lights or converted into LED lights by an Indian company. Massive construction of public transport. So the cities that you come from, is anybody seeing a metro being constructed there? There you go. When I went to school, they were building one metro line in one city of the country, and it took them 20 years. And right now, see the number of hands that are going up. Huge effort in trying to increase public transport and bring emissions down. And of course, the effort to enable electric mobility. Lots of electric rickshaws, three-wheelers, some cars. Any of you here from Bangalore? Oh, so many of you. Have you heard of a company called Lithium? There you go. Some 500 odd electric cars on the streets, ferrying people from the airports. Yeah? A fantastic startup, and that's just one example. How many of you from Delhi? Come to you. There you go. Do you know of any electric car taxi company in your city? You do. I will come to that after the cards. Okay. So there are two companies in Delhi, not very big. One is called e-taxi, and the other one is Blue Mobility. I'm not sure I've got that name right. It does begin with blue, but there are two. So if you're hiring a taxi and you call these guys, you'll get an electric taxi, right? But these are just examples of what's happening in our country now. So there are two of you I said I'll come back to. One was you? Was it? Yeah.
You just mentioned it now that the government of India is working for example mostly, but this year itself, the government of India ordered, how should I say, Bombay to cut down 2,141 trees to build a metro.
Right, they did. What? True. So I guess you would say that why can you cut down trees to build a metro? Right. So I want you to look into it in a little bit more detail and ask the question, a set of questions. I won't give you answers, but I'll give you the questions. How many trees did they plant as compensation for this? Hold on, keep your answers to yourself. If they did not build the metro, if they don't have that car shed and they compromise the building of the metro, how much of emissions will they cause? And there are a few more questions which if you look for the answers for these two, you will discover. In fact, one of the things that the Metro Corporation did well was to show how what they are doing is actually benefiting society rather than harming society. It's a very detailed, long discussion. You must get into the details before we get into a discussion. Because if you don't know the details, we will only be in one side of the problem. Okay? I had asked, yes.
Yeah, so in terms of electric mobility, so if suppose it's 50 or 10% of our energy comes from fossil fuel sources, and we plug in these cars to charge, and these cars are fossil fuels, then by
It'll be awful, right? Correct. So, two things that help answer your apprehension. One, when India is completely electrified for mobility, or let's say all cars become electric, the increase to energy demand is going to be 4%. So the change is not very high. Second, as you saw somewhere else in the presentation, there is a parallel effort to increase renewable energy. And our commitment is 40% energy from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030. So because these two things are happening parallelly, the net effect on emissions is going down or is expected to go down. If they were not done together, what you're saying would be a very real danger. Very well. In the middle of all this, so we discussed government. You mentioned corporations, and you were bang on. Some 100 corporations contribute 70% of all the emissions in the world. So obviously corporations have to do something. Yeah, so this is our sustainability framework. Can you read what's written on the slide from behind?
I just have a question. Why do you use the government to take action? We had the Kyoto Protocol, the Copenhagen Protocol, promises were made but never held up. And right now we're again making promises. India is making promises, but it's never going to hold up. And as you mentioned, the Paris Agreement, most of the nations won't reach the agreement by 2030. Let's take example of Canada. It's going to take 261 years at the rate it's going to meet the Paris Agreement. So what's the point of us having this thing?
What's the alternative? So I see this as a Mr. Greta Thunberg question. Give me the alternative.
Yes, so we are people, let's take example of Coca-Cola, we are the people who are buying it. They had a video out that's awful for our health, but we are the people who are buying it. At least if we do proper disposal, we our welfare on our side. So we're the one who's spoiling the earth. It's not the company we're the ones who are encouraging them to buy the products and use them. So the mistake on our side, we should not wait for the government to take appropriate action that time, because that will never happen.
Good point of view. You actually jumped to my last slide. So I will come back to you on the last slide. Yeah.
You as a nation, as a Lloyd, but seeing our ambitious goals, very famously, our Prime Minister said that he believes climate change is a myth. So how can we?
Who said climate change is a myth?
Our Prime Minister.
Really? Is he called Donald Trump? No, I don't think our Prime Minister said that at all. You must show me what interview that is.
I think he probably said climate change may update
So, if you're interpreting that as climate change is a myth, it's not correct. The poor man is going to his grave trying to get us all to act because of climate change. And the sort of leadership he's taken to begin the International Solar Alliance is something that India should be proud of. It's fabulous. Okay, so let's move on. Keeping in mind that we have to take action is the one that gets the most applause. So we should get to that section quickly. All right, so this is what Mahindra does. I don't want to spend too much time on it. You heard a bit of it in the introduction. We are going to be a carbon neutral company. Just like you have a lot of angst on coca-cola, some people have a lot of angst on us because we make diesel cars. And we have also therefore invested in electric vehicles. We are the largest. It's tiny, but still the largest in the country. And we are hoping to ensure that the transition to electric vehicles happens quickly. There are many other businesses we are in, such as converting waste to energy, building green buildings, helping agriculture save 30 to 40% water. So these are all things we try to do to take climate action so that we can reduce the rate of emissions that's happening because of India. So that brings me to my last slide. Of course we must act. And you have made the point better than anybody else. Right through this conversation, the emphasis you've put on we have to take action, we don't have to wait for anybody, is emphasis that is well heard by leaders of the world. But the question is, what should we do? So if I extend your Coca-Cola questions, you would probably say maybe we should drink less or not drink Coca-Cola. What else should we do? Yes, what action? What action should we take? Yes.
follow proper responsible guidelines because when it is the name of the individual, but it's our job to
So, with your permission, when you're answering, is it okay if I paraphrase what you're saying and move on quickly? Because I think some people are getting very anxious about the amount of time I'm taking with you. So what I hear you saying is we must segregate our waste. We must make sure that whatever can be recycled is recycled, and whatever can be composted is composted. Things don't get sent to the landfill. Is there more to it? No, but we throw the garbage, no? Who produces most of the garbage? Rich people. Yeah, where is most garbage produced? Rich countries. So wherever there is development, wherever the poverty goes away, garbage increases. So we obviously have to, so segregation is one. Okay. What else should we do? Okay, so let's get specific. What can you do in your life? What can you do in school? What can you do in home?
Okay, sir, what I am about to say will sound crazy, but I hope you can catch that. Sir, what I am about to say is that internet speech and towards carbon emitters. So what I say is you should stop watching too much stuff online. I mean, maybe on a TV. I started with that. I get to the phone soon enough, but I started with that. And okay, it's going to sound very sad, but one of my grandparents told me that you can appreciate that the button from science.
Didn't get the last bit. What did your grandparent tell you?
Yeah, has a button phone for one.
Bill Gates has a button phone, okay?
Even I understand it should be as bad. And it should not be as bad as the smartphone. So it will release carbon, but it won't exaggerate.
Okay. Do you think this guy's crazy when he says, you've got your answer? So, one short intervention. Earlier in the conversation, we said that climate change and all these emissions is the unintended consequence of things we have done in the past. There are things we are doing now, and there are unintended consequences of that. One of the things we are doing now is moving to a world where we're doing extensive amount of streaming and we are using huge amounts of data. All this data is in servers which require humongous amounts of energy to cool. And that energy required for cooling causes more emissions. So just like 100 years ago, we made automobiles that cause emissions, today we are building servers, we're building farms of servers, cities of servers, which will cause the emissions of the future. Thank you for that. Okay. What can we do? You have made a very strong point that we must act. But if we don't know what to do, we will never act. And we will keep saying we must act. And then it won't work. So I want to close this conversation with some strong examples of what you and I can do in our lives, in our places of work and life. Yes, one example at a time. Go on.
Plant 10 plants in a year. So in 10 years, it can be 100 plants, and a plant consumes 1,000 tons of CO2 in a year. So it can be 1,000 to 1,000 square tons of CO2 be consumed.
Fantastic. Where? In your house, in your garden, in your school, where will you do it?
We can plant in a garden or in a house.
Your house, your garden, your school.
In everywhere.
Everywhere. Okay. So you know where I'm going? Things we can do. Okay? Yes. Yes.
The most obvious thing is like to launch a strike, because if industries and governments are the ones who are producing garbage and we are the ones who are supporting them, if we launch a strike, ultimately industries and governments are nothing.
Terrific. One more Greta Thunberg. Put your hands together. Okay, that's a way of bringing about change. Greta's doing it. You can. What can you do?
So if the trees which we cut, let's say we have cut 10 trees, so that amount of only trees we have to plant. So it can maintain the amount of trees we have.
Whatever you cut, you plant. So trees, more trees. Okay?
So we must stop getting deceived by multinational companies.
Oh, good God.
See, in India you have 1,000 festivals every year, and then car companies say that Diwali offer 1 lakh cashback, and then you have H&M with fast fashion, which spoils the environment.
So you're saying don't buy more because people are giving deals? That's what you're saying. I understand you now. So buy as much as you need, not because somebody's giving it to you, giving it to you cheap. Will you be able to do that yourself?
No, that's why I'm saying that multinational corporations should act a bit more human.
No. The conversation is what will you do?
No, see, I have, not everyone has conscience.
So can you see the disconnect? Hold on. I think it's important to address this now. Can you see the disconnect? This strong belief that we are the ones who must act, but having no solutions or ideas on what we are going to do. This can't happen. If as an answer to this question, you find yourself saying what other people can do, we have a problem. Maybe that's why we're having this conversation. If we so strongly believe that it is we who must act, then we must know what we must do. Switch off lights when you don't need them. 2, if you have an air conditioner in the house and you switch it on, put it on a timer. Put it on a 1-hour timer or a 2-hour timer so that your room gets cold, the AC is shut off, you're comfortable when you're sleeping. You consume less energy than when the AC keeps on working right through the night. Okay? Single-use plastic, you already know. When you're using water in the bathrooms that you use, these taps have a little device, or can have a little device called an aerator. It cuts down the flow of water by 30 to 40%. You will be able to wash your hands. There'll be no problem at all, but you will consume less water. They're very cheap. You can put it in any tap you want. When you have a WC, a water closet, anywhere, especially in your homes, you get a dual flush system. You don't always need all the water to clean the water closet. Sometimes you need much less. So there are two buttons. It's easy to get water closets of that kind. It's also easy to retrofit in many places. Right? These are simple, doable things we can do in our own houses, and we can encourage it to be done in schools. You can have urinals which don't use water. That technology exists. Now you can clean cars without using water. So all these technologies exist. Yeah, there are many more, but we don't have time to go into that. So may I encourage you to Google for simple things that we can do to make a contribution towards climate change. You will find all this online. And may I encourage you to use as many as you can in the lives that you lead. Then, the emphatic way in which you say that we must act will have far more credibility than when you say somebody else must act.